Hello and welcome to Career Conversations. My name is Richard Retha, and we are pleased to have Career Conversations continue this year. We have Claire Stanley, who will be our guest, and Lori Scharf will be interviewing Claire. And we invite our audience to write questions in the chat, of which we will field later on in the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And we have with us tonight Claire Stanley, and Claire works with National Disability Rights Network, and she's a public policy analyst. She will be transitioning to a new job, and I hope that will come up in our conversation. So thank you for joining us, Claire.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the invitation.
So, as somebody who has a degree in law, when did you realize that law was an interest of yours?
For sure. So when I was in high school, a few things happened. I was invited to participate in a few different programs that were all about disability advocacy. So as somebody, who's blind with a disability, I was invited to participate first in a really great conference in Washington, D.C., where I got exposed to the advocacy world in Capitol Hill and kind of got the advocacy bug. And then in addition, I apologize. I just heard my phone talk. And so in addition to that, I also was part of Model United Nations in high school. And for those who aren't familiar with that, it's a lot like speech and debate, but with an international kind of spin on it. So all that to say, I also got really involved in research and speech and debate and public speaking and that kind of thing, and just really excelled at it and really enjoyed it and had fun. So I think it was kind of a combination of both those things that got me interested in kind of focusing in on something that would take me toward law and policy and political science. So I knew even my senior year when I was applying to college that political science was the major that I wanted to do that would hopefully lead to law. And so I would say I'm really fortunate because there was some statistic they used to say at my undergrad about how many times undergrad students changed their major, and it was quite a few times. And I never did. I always knew I wanted to be political science. So yeah, I think the exposure I had in high school was really helpful.
Lori, let me ask Claire a quick clarification. Do you want to mute your speech, because there will be a lot of things coming in the chat that you will hear otherwise?
Yes, let me do that. I'm just afraid that if I do need to fix something on my phone, it's that fight of, do I need to hear what voiceover is telling me? I will mute it for now and we'll see if I have any problems. Thanks, Richard. Okay, I have turned voiceover off.
Okay. So great. So it sounds like you really laid the foundations at an early age, and people do frequently change their majors, which is not uncommon.
Yeah.
Which is not uncommon, and it's so nice, I think, for people when they do find something and really stick to it. Did you have any experiences, whether it be undergraduate or when you went on and did your law degree, did you have any experiences there with internships or anything like that that shaped your area of public policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. Internships, I think, are really what helped me in all kinds of ways to guide me in what I was interested in, what I liked, what I didn't like. They helped with networking to build those relationships to lead to future internships and then onward to jobs. So yes. So I could probably list a whole, if I go back through my resume in my head, a whole slew of different internships, but I'm a huge proponent of them and I recommend them. I think my first internship I did in undergrad, since I was a political science major, I thought it would be fun to try something in that world. So I think it was, in fact, my first summer between my freshman and sophomore year, I got a legislative internship. I'm from California, so I got one with the California state legislature, and I just interned in the congressman's home office, so not even in Sacramento, but just in his home office in my hometown area. And I loved it. It was just great exposure and Again, then I had something to go on my resume, which then helped me get another internship, and so on and so forth. One of my big ones that I loved internship wise was we had a program. I went to the University of California, Davis. So the University of California has this program called the UCDC program, where you get to live in DC for a quarter, intern. They house you, you take courses there. So I actually interned with the Department of Justice Disability Rights section. And the way I ended up getting the internship was through a mentor I knew through the blind community. He helped me land the interview for it. Then the person that I interned for, she was blind herself and has become a mentor since. And then that helped lead to future internships and so on and so forth. So it was just such a one, it was an amazing learning experience. And again, another networking experience, and also just a reflection of how making those connections really can pay off in all kinds of ways.
Yes, mentorship, being mentored, as and also mentoring people is so important. And can you share any advice maybe that you remember from a mentor that you have carried throughout your career and felt that it's helped you?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I think one of the things that I just said is something I've heard from mentors and carry it with me, both as something I've heard and then something I just have lived and found to be true about networking. I think all of us say like, oh man, they say to network and it can be exhausting. But it's really true. The relationships you make, overnight, they might not lead to something, but down the line they will. So I know I've had a lot of mentors say, keep in touch with the people you meet and build those relationships. And I've really found that to be extremely true and authentic and really helpful. So I think that's one thing. Um, and so I've also just been really fortunate to have, like I said, a few blind and or disabled um, mentors. And I wouldn't say I can't, I don't have one specific thing they've taught me, but just having blind or disabled mentors who are older than me has also just been really helpful in just really like spurring me on, right? Like kind of, it sounds funny to say, but it's true. Like if they did it, I can do it. So having that role model who is also a person with a disability or also someone who is blind really, I think, helped to like get me excited because I saw what they were doing, and so I felt like I could go on and do it. And then one other thing related to that is having advocate mentors who are also disabled, encouraging me to be bold to ask for accommodations. We all know it can be a little nerve wracking to go in and say, hey, under the ADA, I have a right to have accommodations or that kind of thing. And so having some mentors to really encourage me and empower me to speak up for myself.
And speaking of accommodations, while you were in school, did you have any accommodations that you found particularly beneficial?
Yeah. So I, of course, got, the typical as somebody who's blind, I needed my books in an alternative format. So in undergrad, I got most of my books in e-formats. That's the thing of our current generation that, things are more
Yep.
electronic. But when I went off to law school, I really realized that I wanted to have my books in Braille. I'm a huge proponent of Braille and I'm a visual learner, so I really need to see the words at my fingertips. And so having books in an e-format in law school was fine, but I felt that reading things in Braille would be more beneficial just because of the way you learn and process things, especially in law school. It's a lot of reading. And so I asked the university to get my books in Braille, and they were a little hesitant at first, just because it is a big undertaking, right? All of us who have ever been involved in any way with the production of Braille. It costs money, it takes time. You need a Braille embosser. And so the university was a little pushed back a little bit, like, come on, the ebooks are fine, you can do it. And I really had to be my own advocate and say, no, I think in order for me to be truly successful as a law student, I'm going to need my books in Braille. So I've had ebooks, I've had Braille books, and then of course the accommodations. I had accommodations in K-12 to usually have double time for tests, which was really helpful because then in college and law school, I was able to point back to my history of accommodations and say, I've always had double time for tests. I should continue on. Um, I could go off on a tangent. I promise I won't. But one thing I will say is that, at least in law, and I would venture is probably the same in a lot of graduate programs, when you need accommodations for major tests like the LSAT or the bar,
Mhm.
often want a history of accommodations, because if
Yes.
suddenly you say, oh, I need accommodations, they're going to say, why? So if you can point to a long history of getting of accommodations, it really helps. So the accommodations I got for AP tests then translated to the SATs, then translated to the LSAT, and so on and so forth. So having that history of accommodations is really
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah.
That is very important, and it's also important to be able to write a statement of why you need the
Yes.
accommodations. Very often that is part of the paperwork submission process for those
Yeah.
types of tests.
Yes, very much so.
Mhm. So, your public policy work, can you tell us a little bit about how that works? What are your job duties, and what are some things that maybe you like, some things that you're kind of like, oh, I gotta go do this. Because everybody has that aspect of a job. Nobody loves everything in their job.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I always tell people I'm a public policy analyst, AKA I'm a lobbyist. I think sometimes it's easier to say because it makes it a little more blunt and upfront as to what it is. But for those who aren't familiar with what you do in the lobbying world, you're basically advocating on Capitol Hill or to federal agencies about whatever cause or whatever um, issue it is that you want to advocate for to create new laws or to push back against laws that are being created, or in the federal agency space it might be with the promulgation of new regulations, advocating to a member of the cabinet for their federal agency to really work on an issue that we want to see prioritized. So I specifically work for the National Disability Rights Network, or NDRN. So as the name implies, we advocate for people with disabilities. So that's kind of my area of expertise, which I can go off on in a little bit if you guys would be interested. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, many of the internships I had, for instance, that disability rights section at DOJ, were in that field. And so as things slowly but surely evolved, I built up my toolkit of that expertise. Um, but anyway, that's a side tangent I'd be happy to go on to. But to answer this question, as a public policy analyst or lobbyist, it's my job to just constantly, I'll use the word network again, but reaching out to other lobbyists, so other advocates, reaching directly out to Congress, getting to know their staffers, getting to know the employees in the federal agencies, constantly setting up meetings. There can be a lot of components of research because when we're talking about an issue, we obviously need to know the intricacies of an issue. So, for instance, if we're talking about a new Social Security bill, Social Security is really complicated. So, I might have to do some research on that. Um, a lot of writing, we might write letters to Congress. Um, yeah, so just a lot of interacting with other people, which I like. I'm an extrovert, so anything that requires me to interact with other individuals, I personally really enjoy. So that's great. Um, I think one of the things that I don't like that comes with the territory is you have to really pound the pavement, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively. And you're going to have to repeat yourself a lot, which to a certain extent I don't mind, but it becomes discouraging when you feel like you've had to say the same elevator pitch so many times and people just aren't taking you seriously. Or just, they kind of wave it off as something they're not going to commit to. So you definitely have to continue on with endurance and know that maybe the first 10 times you say something, it's not going to yield something, but you would be surprised. I have said the same thing 10 times and had people kind of shrug their shoulders at me. And then I say it the 11th time, and a staffer on the Hill gets all excited and wants to work with me. And I'm like, yes, it finally
Yes.
worked. something clicked. So
You broke through.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a Braille reader, when you're in meetings with staffers and or I don't know if you like do testimony on the Hill or anything like that, but do you read your material in Braille, or do you kind of submit it and then do it extemporaneously? Could you talk maybe about how you would handle those types of situations?
Yeah. So a little bit of both. I, like I've said before, I'm a huge Braille reader and I'm a visual learner. And so I like to have my notes at my fingertips. That's just how I do, I'm more successful. So I always have a note taker. I always have a Braille display, and pretty much anywhere I go, you'll see it. It's on my lap, it's on my desk, that kind of thing. So I always have my notes, on my Braille display so I can review them and go to them and access them, because I don't have the best memory. So it's, much more beneficial to just have your notes. But then, yes, I definitely have learned to speak extemporaneously. If I try to read word for word verbatim on things, I don't think it's going to be as compelling. It's not going to be as effective. So I've definitely learned, a lot of times when I speak, I'll have kind of bullet points. Like, these are the 30 things that I want to touch upon. So I have the notes in front of me. I'm reading them in Braille, but then I'm speaking more extemporaneously based on the bullet points. So it's kind of a combination of both.
Great. Can you think of any tasks that are essential with your job that you may have struggled with in the beginning and had to develop skills over time, or come up with ways to handle things? And jobs change and evolve, so some of that may have been part of the issue, but maybe something that, looking back, you did not have a skill coming in from college, that you had to learn something in the world of work.
Mm-hmm. When I hear that question, some of the first things that are popping into mind are some of the technology components. I am not the most tech savvy person. I love tech. I'm using my iPhone right now, but I'm just not one of those people who's naturally drawn to hop on my computer and just try things out. But we live in a world of technology. It's 2024. I was just talking to some coworkers today. We use Teams at my office. Everybody loves these multimodal complex systems, and you just can't get away from them. Like, it just is
Yep.
what it is. And so I really had to force, seems like such a strong word, but I've had to force myself to, get my hands dirty with technology that I don't necessarily find intuitive. And you know what? Sometimes it's not, unfortunately. And that's why we do a lot of advocacy in the disability space about accessible web access and things like that. But in the meantime, before things are perfectly accessible, sometimes you just have to roll up your sleeves and do what you got to do. And it's not always easy. I just think, even when I was still in law school, spreadsheets, I hated them. I found them so not intuitive, and why would we use them? You would laugh now. If you go in my folders, I use spreadsheets all the time, but it just took me putting my toe in there, because it just seemed like such a visual concept that I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. But by trial and error and playing with it, I got more used to it. So yeah, I think that the technology world, and again, it's tough because some things truly aren't accessible, some things are in between, but just jumping in and seeing what you can get done. And when it's not accessible, being your own advocate about that.
Yes, very important. Yeah, and I think sometimes people come out of maybe a vocational rehabilitation training program thinking, okay, like, I learned how to use XYZ, and then they get into the world of work or the world of college, and they realize they are underprepared in those areas. So
Yeah.
that's very good to hear. I like that you're recommending that. I want to remind people that you can type your questions into the chat. I know there are some there already. And we will get to those in a minute. Before I turn it over to audience questions, though, would you have anything specific that you would suggest, as maybe a recommendation, or like words of wisdom type of thing, for our participants?
Just in general and focus
Yeah.
on employment. Ooh, anything.
Or
uh,
anything. I mean, because let's face it, any words of wisdom anywhere in your life can help you
yeah.
throughout your life.
I guess as it pertains to getting an education, going to college, thinking about jobs, I just always think it's so important to just get involved in as many things as possible. When I was in college, even though I still knew what my major was, I just got involved in so many clubs. I did Model UN. We had a lobbying club at my school. Just so many, I'd go to events. They'd have speakers come to our school. I think just taking advantage of the programs and the resources that your university provides. And even stepping back before that, I know even high schools now have so many clubs and programs. Just really getting exposure to everything you can, because you just never know. You'll learn from it. You'll network with it. You'll learn what you like. You'll learn what you don't like. And just opportunities come from the most unexpected places. So don't hide in your room. Go out and get exposed to as many things as you can.
It's so true. Lori, I want to ask Claire a question.
Mhm.
Um,
Sure, go right
so
ahead.
yeah, so Claire, in great interview. Love what you're saying, and it resonates so much. You're obviously in the position you've held and that you're going to have in other positions. You obviously have to get out of the house. Your job probably isn't a whole lot of remote these days.
Mhm.
Maybe it was during the pandemic. Tell us about getting around. Tell us about maybe you're working with a guide dog, and does that work to your advantage when you're up on Capitol Hill and talking with people? Is your dog a social icebreaker, and just in general, like the travel component of your job and working with a guide dog?
And
Absolutely.
also feel free to share where you're transitioning to.
Oh yeah. So as far as, oh, 1 second. Sorry. My phone was dying, so I needed to do that before so you could see me again.
Good point. Yes.
Yeah, I want to make sure you can see me. Um, so yeah, getting around. Well, I'll put one little thing in it first. So I grew up in Southern California, like I said, and I had great orientation and mobility training, but we just didn't have a lot of public transit options. And I know that's just the reality for different parts of the country. But I really wanted to live somewhere where I had more um, access to public transportation, and it's totally a give or take. Don't get me wrong, there's reasons why people would want to stay in different neighborhoods or different parts of the country, but I personally was like, I want to go somewhere where I can take public transit. So that's why I really enjoyed living in the Washington DC area, because we have more access. But I do travel with a guide dog. I have had a guide dog for over 15 years now, which makes me feel very confident. She's very my current guide dog, Tulane, she just has no fear when we get on the train in the morning. It's just like no issue.
Right.
um but yeah, as far as kind of an icebreaker in the work situation, I think it really does help. I go to Capitol Hill a lot and talk to congressional staffers, and there's something about having a friendly yellow Labrador wagging her tail that just breaks the ice. So it is really helpful in a lot of situations. We all know that when you're blind, sometimes people can unfortunately act awkward around you. They don't know what to say, but having a dog definitely does help, I think, break some of that ice. People are more willing and willing to talk to you, kind of thing, which is unfortunate in some respects, but it is the reality. So, and Laura, you had talked about what's coming next. So I've been at NDRN for 3 years now, and I have loved every moment of it. He obviously doesn't hear this, but my current boss, I love him, and I've learned so much from him. But I have a new position. I'm actually starting right after Martin Luther King weekend. I'll be the new director of advocacy and governmental affairs for the American Council of the Blind. So I'll be doing a lot of similar work to what I'm doing now, but I will now be overseeing some other people, which is going to be a interesting and learning experience to oversee other people, and have some responsibilities in really designing and working out what we're going to work on and that kind of thing. So it's exciting, but it's, I'm a little nervous. It's a new role, but I think it'll be a great opportunity.
Great, very exciting. And Richard and Katie, are we ready to move to our questions in our chat box?
Sure, we have several questions that have come in. The first, and you kind of talked to this earlier, but we have someone who's interested in the field and they're pursuing their degree. Wondering if you can talk a little bit, if you have any more to add to the day-to-day work that you do within your role.
Sure. And I think the fun thing and the interesting thing about the advocacy space is that your day can look so different. Sometimes you're spending a lot of time in meetings with other advocates, kind of plotting and planning and brainstorming what you're going to do. And sometimes I can spend all day on Capitol Hill. Sometimes I'm at conferences. I was just this past week, Department of Transportation put on the Transportation Research Board conference. And then other times I can just be behind my computer, like so many jobs these days, sending lots and lots of emails and responding to lots of emails. So it can be a lot of things, which I personally think is fun, right? Because it's, not the same schlep every day, all day. It's a variation of a lot of things. But yeah, a lot of research, a lot of writing, a lot of networking. And you can't be shy because just a lot of interaction with a lot of people.
Great. Next, we have someone who comments about the idea of having a mentor with a disability, and they are wanting to do that with some of their students who are preparing for the workforce. So how did you find your mentor, and what advice would you have for finding a mentor?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of ways to find a mentor, both structurally versus organically. I know a lot of different programs out there have mentorship programs. I know every state is a little bit different, but there's a program called the Youth Leadership Forum that started in California, and it's all about empowerment for youth with disabilities. And they usually have a summer program, and I know it's spread not to all 50 states, but quite a few states. So that they call it YLF. YLF is a great place to find a mentor. There are some specific career specific groups out there in the legal community. There's something called the National Association of Law Students with Disabilities. That's kind of a more structured place you could find a mentor. But honestly, I've also just found mentors and mentees kind of organically just through networking and being introduced to people and just kind of starting to build these natural mentee mentorship situations. So I would just encourage anybody, one, seek out structured programs, whether they be for youth with disabilities or more topic specific to the areas you're interested in. But also, again, just getting to know people through groups like the American Council of the Blind. They have, the student affiliate, all kinds of different things. There's, a lot of different ways you can meet other people. We're a really small community. There's always that joke where, for those of us who are blind, they'll say, "Oh, I know someone who's blind. I bet you know them." And we say that's not true. And then we kind of turn around and go, "Actually, it is true." So, whenever, just us here on the call now, if you're like, "Hey, I'm interested in chemistry. I have a friend who's blind and is a chemist. I could introduce you." So whatever you're interested in, don't be afraid to ask somebody and say, "I'm interested in certain things. Can you introduce me?" And I would say 98% of the time we will have a connection for you.
And we also, through the Connect Center, have blogs and different material written by people in lots of different careers. And very often you can then find them on social media.
Yeah. That's a great point. We're in the world of the era of social media. So through things like Instagram, TikTok, you can probably find lots of people too. So
All right, kind of shifting gears a little bit to talking a little bit more about the technology space. We have a question asking about what Braille display you prefer to use, and also wondering if you also use hard copy Braille.
Oh, great questions. So I've used a variety of different Braille displays over the years. Through, I literally feel like through college and then grad school, and now I've used every different iteration of Human Wears Braille display products. And I don't think there's like one right or wrong, right? Everybody has their preferences. One thing that was interesting for me over the last few years was I needed a new Braille display when I started my job at NDRN. And so under Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, I had the right to request that. Now under the ADA, they have to provide you accommodations, but they don't necessarily have to provide you the exact thing you ask for. It just has to provide an accommodation that'll help you be successful. So all that to say, I went in going, I need a Braille display, but they could say, okay, we'll pick from X, Y, or Z model. And they were really great. They ended up getting me what I wanted. But my point there is sometimes, you know, you might not get the exact model you want, but just knowing how to speak up for yourself. But yeah, I've most recently been using the Brilliant 40 and I love it. But I've used all kinds of them, and yeah, there's a lot out there. So, and then as far as hard copy Braille, I love hard copy Braille. Feasibly, it's hard just because it takes up a lot of space. But I still have a Perkins Braille writer in my closet and busted it out all the time when I just want notes. I have a friend who was actually my Braille transcriber from when I was in elementary school all the way through high school. So many years ago now, showing my age. And she had a friend of a friend who is also a Braille transcriber who had I think it's a Juliet that's 20 years old, and she was getting rid of it, and she said, do you want it? And I said, yeah, I want it. So I now have a 20-year-old Juliet sitting in my condo that I can use. And so again, it's not something I use every day, but I love to just be able to have Braille at my fingertips. So
It is very nice. It's kind of
Yes.
like a sighted person having something on paper versus on a
yeah,
smart device.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so wondering how you deal with, you know, we talked a little bit about the inaccessible devices and challenges, but wondering how you deal with inaccessible print material. You know, sometimes that could be electronic, right? Like a PDF. We've all seen some of those. You know, what are some ways that you deal with that? Do you use a human reader, for example, or how do you address that issue?
That's a great question. And I would say many different ways. So when I'm in the work environment, I've learned that if a document or resource isn't accessible online, as an accommodation, I have the right to speak up for myself. So I've had our IT specialist in my office convert more than one inaccessible PDF document for me. In the lobbying world, we have several different databases you can pay a lot of money for to access all kinds of different government resources. And we use one called Political Pro, which I love. It's mostly accessible, but it's not perfect. So there have been times when you are a subscriber to these databases, you always have a rep. I've literally emailed the rep and said, hey, sorry, your website's not completely accessible. I need X, Y, and Z documents. And under the ADA, they need to accommodate you. And so they've emailed me the documents. So I've done it that way. I'm a huge user of Ira. I love Ira, so I've done that. And then sometimes just reaching out to the company and saying, hey, by the way, you know, I'm trying to use your website and it's not accessible. Every now and then, you know, I'll rely on a coworker or a family member if I have to. So I always say you have to have lots of tools in your toolkit. So having different apps, knowing your rights and when and where to ask, and those kinds of things. So it's definitely a combination of a lot of different ways I use to kind of deal with those situations.
I think that's a very good point, Claire. It's always important to be continually expanding the tools in your toolbox. And I always say if I stayed there with the DOS computer, now I'm showing my age, I'd be way behind the eight ball, but you know, you have to grow with technology and
Yeah.
you have to learn things outside your comfort zone. And very often for people who are blind or low vision, that has a technological component to it. And it is really about knowing how to efficiently use things.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you finding that you have to set aside some time to teach yourself these new technologies or programs when they come out? Do you build it into your workday, or is it just like building an extra time for assignments?
I think definitely building it into my work time. I also think it's kind of prioritizing like what's going to be the best use of my time and the best components of a resource. So for instance, like I was talking about with Political Pro, for the most part, it's accessible and I've learned to get the main things I need, but the app is more accessible than the website. So I'll use the app more. Certain things are easier to look up versus trying to look up the tables and spreadsheets. So those are the times that I'll email the rep of the company because I'm like, why waste my time on something that she can probably do in 2 minutes that even if I can figure out will probably take me an hour. So it's being strategic about your time.
Yeah.
On Teams, there are certain things on Teams that I don't like Teams because I don't find it very
Mhm.
accessible, but I've learned that I have to use it in certain contexts. But again, there are certain parts that are totally worth figuring out where there are other elements of Teams that I'm like, the benefit of figuring this out is just not worth the time. So it's just being strategic too about learning what's worth the fight and worth the time versus what the benefit return just isn't going to be enough in
And
my opinion.
and I think that's a really good point also about, you know, that sometimes the website can be clunky and the app is good or vice versa.
Yeah,
So, you know, checking out those things that it goes back to the tools in your toolbox and really figuring out what works best for you. And then they
exactly.
throw in an update and it might switch on you.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Oh yeah.
All right, so kind of one more question right now on the technology side of things. Curious about if you thought that your technology training in school was sufficient, or did you kind of self-teach some of those tech skills?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, so I think I'll say my answer will be yes and yes, I was very fortunate to have some great lessons from my TVIs. I did a couple programs through the California School for the Blind and through Braille Institute, and so other things like that. So I definitely got some great exposure to assistive technology. So in that respect, absolutely. But I think the hard thing also is technology is just always changing. So the and is yes, I got the training, but there's just always more to learn. My TVI that I had in high school, she used to say that she would learn just enough about assistive technology for her students to go on and figure it out because she knew a couple years later there'd be a new toy out there. So I think I definitely was fortunate to get the training, but I feel like it's also hard isn't the right word, but for lack of a better word, it's hard because there's always going to be something new in a couple years, and technology is going to change. Like I remember when PDFs came onto the stage, I had gotten such great assistive technology training, but when PDFs came out, you know, so many years ago, and they weren't really accessible at that point, I was like, no training in the world would help me for that. Until you know assistive technology caught up with PDFs, and so yes, I was very fortunate, but I think it's always you feel like you're always just chasing behind a little bit, and hopefully that'll change one day. But right now, it's just learning to learn that you're just going to have to adapt and learn, and there's probably always going to be something new to learn. And know that there's a lot of great resources, whether it be through, you know, programs like lighthouses or Voc Rehab that'll hook you up, or you know, all kinds of different things. Just knowing that the resource is out there, but yeah.
And even sitting down and going to the websites
Mhm.
of the technology that you're looking to use, whether it be adaptive technology or technology that's, mainstream, it can also help you figure things out. And, you know, very often there are workarounds. It's just finding what's going to work best for us and,
Absolutely.
learning those skills and,
Yeah,
you know, writing a cheat sheet of common commands that you have to know to navigate teams. That's what I did.
exactly. Yep.
All right, so this is an interesting question. Asking what your view is on the term disability. How do you view the term different ability as a way to change the terminology and maybe even the stigma around disability?
Ooh, great question. I can talk about this all the time. I find these kinds of questions very important. So I personally have no problem with the word disability. I can understand maybe the dis in disability might, initially rub people the wrong way, but I feel like it's the best word we have at this point. I don't like handicap. I feel like that's very inappropriate and outdated. So right now, I think disability is the most, I can't think of a different one. I don't like differing abilities or those kinds of things because I feel like you're just kind of trying to like tiptoe around it. I'm very much so part of the community that is proud of being a person with a disability. So because of that, I just want to own it. I'm like, yeah, I've got a disability. There's nothing wrong with that. So when I feel like you're trying to like find euphemisms to like tiptoe around it, you're just kind of missing the point that, it's not bad to have a disability. So let's not try to dress it up in different clothing. I always compare it to if you're part of another group of people, would you want to change it? I'm not going to be like, don't call me a woman, like, so to me, it's like being disabled is just another component of who I am. So I want to take that word and own it and not try to find some way to change it or hide it or alter it. So that's personally where I stand.
You've integrated it into your identity.
Yes.
Those are the
And I
questions,
think
Kate.
that's all the questions we have at this
That's
time.
all we have so far. Okay.
Claire, let me ask you a
Oh,
question.
Mhm.
Lori, I didn't mean to cut you off.
We just got
okay.
a couple more that came in, so.
Oh, go for it then. That's fine. I can save
Yep.
my question for the end.
All right, this is a good one. Did your employer pay for the upgrades to your technology? So, screen readers, SMA kind of renewals, those types of things. And how, okay, let's start with that one. There's kind of a multi-part question here. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So I have had a few different experiences, but overall, yes. My employers have paid for any assistive technology, JAWS. Like I said, my current almost no longer job, I had requested a new braille display at that point and they got it. Um, I like to think I'm fortunate because a lot of my work has been in the disability advocacy space. So I feel like they're a little bit more compliant, but even still, to comply with the ADA, but even still, it's a little nerve wracking to ask for a, piece of equipment that's several $1,000s. Everybody's going to balk at a dollar sign regardless of who they are. But I have been very fortunate. I haven't been denied any accommodations. Like I said, you might not get exactly what you want, but I've always been able to get what I needed to be successful. Um, I did in my first job right out of law school, I did a fellowship. Most of my technology at that point was my own that I had procured through Voc Rehab, Department of Rehab, is what California's VR program is called. So, for instance, I had a Braille note at that point because VR had purchased it for me. So, my employer, for my first job, I didn't have to ask for as much because I had my resources through VR. So I've had combinations of both, outstanding tech from them and then from my employers. But yes, knock on wood, so far so good as far as getting my Title I accommodations through my employers.
And then just a comment here that someone else agrees with you that they think Teams is a lot more difficult than Zoom. So I think many of us would agree with that. And a kind of a final question, or at least for the moment, a final question, asking about, you mentioned your role in Capitol Hill and kind of dressing for success in that role, and really any job. Talking about, how do you go about ensuring that you are kind of looking that professional part as someone who's totally blind? Do you have you worked with sighted friends, a mentor, rehab teacher, etc.?
That's a really good question, because it can be very nerve-wracking to want to dress, not even want to, but know you need to dress for success and look the part, and not, feel like you're underdressing or those kinds of things. My personal experience has been through a few different venues. I have two sisters, but especially one, I have an identical twin sister, and she's always been a phenomenal resource. So anytime when we were living in the same state, growing up, I always felt like I could ask her. But even now that we're living on the opposite side of the country, if I have to buy something, I'll send her an Amazon link and I'll go, "What do you think?" Or I'll pull up FaceTime with the dress and hold it up and say, "What do you think?" So I definitely use the resources of my family, and the same thing with friends. I'll do the same thing. We also, it wasn't just for those of us who are blind, but at my law school, we had a full seminar session that they put on one night for all of us about how to dress for success as lawyers in my law school. So I think that was just really telling that it's not just for blind people, it's for all of us. We want to know what's expected. So we did that at my law school. So yeah, I think just a combination of things.
And it's a good point, because in different environments, you're going to dress differently. If you're a lawyer and you're going into a prison system, you're going to dress very different than how you're going to dress if you're going to meet with the legislator on Capitol Hill, or, something like that, just because of the type of environment it is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I've never done it, but
yeah,
it's speculation on my part. I've gone to see clients as a social worker in jail, so I know what that's like.
Right.
And I think one other component of it is just not being afraid to ask people. Just knowing, "Hey, you friend, will you go shopping with me?" Or, "Hey, I picked this up. What do you think?" And not being afraid to ask people's opinion and take their opinion. It just being willing to ask for input from people is just really important.
I have a question I'll ask, and we're getting pretty close to wrapping it up, Claire. I'm guessing, or speculating, I suppose, were there jobs that you've applied for that you didn't get, that you were bummed out about? And how did that guide your future job search? As a blind person with disability, often we're applying for more jobs than the average person to get our foot in the door, with the unemployment rate being as significant as it is. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so my first experience, so I graduated from college and undergrad in 2011, and I'll always remember that year because I applied to so many jobs. And I always like to try to remind myself it was during the recession, so finding a job was hard enough for anybody. But I just remember applying for so many jobs, and I would even get the interviews, but then I would go and you could just feel that awkward tension in the room, right? Like we've all been there. Those of us who are blind, we know that feeling. It was like, "Oh, you're blind," and they didn't know what to say. And it was really frustrating. So yeah, there were a lot of jobs I applied for or would even have an interview for and wouldn't get. And it was frustrating. And I wish I could say like, "Don't worry, it's fine." No, it's tough and it's real and it's just the reality of things. But I think it definitely helped to motivate me to do the work that I do now and to advocate for other people. I definitely learned over time what to say or how to break the ice. For instance, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, they're not supposed to ask you about your disability during an interview. That's not legally permissible. But I learned that in the real world, you needed to break the ice. And so if I'm sitting at the table and someone's like, she's blind, she can't do the job, I would say, okay, I know you have questions about my blindness. Let's just get it out there on the table.
Yes.
So just learning things like that when you go to different work environments and interviews and things like that.
I've always, when I've done workshops for youth and adults on the interview process, I always said that that's going to come up. It's illegal, but go with it, because if you
Just
want
go
a
with it.
chance,
Yeah, exactly.
and there are going to be questions that you shouldn't be asked that, unless it's completely insulting or asked in a manner that's completely rude, go with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because like you said, it might not be legal, but it's going to be far more effective than the alternative. So
It also shows that you're open to discuss your situation and discuss what you may need. And it also shows that you can use tools in your toolbox that
yeah,
potential employer has. Use the tools in your toolbox that the employer or future employer may not even know that you have in your toolbox.
yeah, for sure. I remember I had one job interview years ago during that gap between undergrad and grad school, and they said, "Well, how do you do it?" And I said, "Oh, well, with assistive technology, I can do X, Y, and Z." And they went, "Oh, that's possible?" And I said, "Yeah, you get a scanner, you get a screen reader. I can't remember all the components at the point, but
Right,
basically, I talked about AT, and they were like, 'We didn't know that existed.' So yeah, people just don't know. So
Any
yeah.
chance you have to educate folks in a friendly manner, by all means do it.
yeah, exactly. And then who knows, maybe it'll benefit someone else in the future too. So
Mhm.
Uh, Lori or Katie, do you have any questions? Otherwise, I wanted to ask Claire, if people want to locate you, do you have a public LinkedIn profile that they could follow you on?
yes, absolutely. I am on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn, it's my full name, Claire Stanley, and I put the JD after it. So Claire Stanley JD. So yeah, please look me up. Please, request a not a friend request, whatever the equivalent is on LinkedIn. I'm happy
Connection.
to connect. Yeah, I think I'm connected with Katie, Lori, and Richard. Also, you'll even see that um, connection there as well. So yeah, please by all means look me up. I'd be happy to answer any questions or help in any way I can. So
Hey, shall we? I turned the speech on to look at the time before, and now I got it rambling in my ear. So I think, are we ready for what time is it?
Yeah, it's just
Oh,
about, it's
well,
close
I
enough.
do
Okay.
I have one more question
Okay.
actually that I have here. Have you ever done anything where you've done litigation actually like in a courtroom or anything like that, or not?
So in my fellowship and in some of my internships, I've been kind of part of the greater cohort of people working on it. So I've been in a courtroom, I've observed and done those kinds of things. I have never been the one at the front
At the
asking the
table.
questions kind of at the
Right.
table. So in that respect, no, but at the same time, yes, I have definitely been part of the greater process, and it's a really interesting process. A lot goes
Yes.
into it. It's not what you see on Law and Order. There's
No,
a lot more
definitely
to it,
not.
a lot going on in the background and a lot of stuff building up to it. But yeah, if you're interested in, again, a lot of research goes into it. A lot of writing goes into it, a lot of collaboration. I remember we were working on one lawsuit when I was doing my legal fellowship right out of law school, and it was a lawsuit that the District of Columbia's Protection and Advocacy Office, that's where I was a fellow, they'd been working
Mhm.
on for years and years. And we had a group of attorneys from, it was like the PNA and AARP and an outside big law firm. So you had like 3 different legal entities all working together. There was probably like 10 attorneys. So all that to say, it just a lot goes into it and a lot of moving parts.
Exciting. Claire, thank you
Yeah.
so much for being our guest this month. And for those watching now and want to share with it, it will be up on YouTube in about 2 weeks from now. So thank you all. This concludes our webinar, and we'll hit the stop button so that you can get the closing codes.